Jerry Gidel is back to Connected Farmer, and Jerry Gidel is from Midland Research. He's going to explain a little bit about the USDA waste report and the U.S. strong exports of both corn and soybeans. Right here on Connected Farmer, your channel to keep you up to date with the latest trends in agriculture and livestock. Stay tuned and don't forget to subscribe. Jerry Gidel, how are you this Friday? First of all, speak a little bit about the USDA waste report. What did you see there?
Well, the October report here was, as always, a nice little twists and turns. Overall, the the carryover scenarios for the coming year were kind of in the range of expectations. Part of that's because of the fact that we had the big adjustments on the stocks reports here on September 30th. We've kind of discussed those last week but their impact helped bring down the carryover stocks for the coming year at this point. The twist of it is that people were anticipating, of course, maybe some minor changes in planted and harvested acres this time. They always do a little bit because of adjustments, but the rumors and talk was that some of the FSA numbers that was being up to date at this point were different of some significance versus the NAS numbers. And boy, did we get some adjustments from the statistics people today. We had over 950,000 tons. I keep saying tons instead of hectares even, or let's talk millions of acres. That's what we talk here in the U.S. Anyway, that particular number in soybeans, particularly along the turn with harvested acres, are down about 940,000 acres. That was quite a twist. And then you go on the corn side, it was that over 1 million acres unplanted and 40,000 acres less on corn plantings. Interestingly enough, both of those numbers were highly influenced by Illinois and Iowa numbers here, both being down. Illinois states on corn, it was 500,000 acres that they supposedly did not plant, which is quite a miss from having two chances back in the prospective plantings, which were down sharply when we got to acreage, and then we're down again on this particular number. And the twist of all that is that they didn't change some of the yields on it. We had people saying that they heard good yields from the country. Other people said, oh, it's not so good, and definitely corn on corn was not doing very well in areas west of the Mississippi, and even parts of Illinois. That particular cropping pattern has turned up some kind of disappointing yields. In some cases, you're talking about 25 to 30% off, and with the weather that was out there in Iowa, and maybe even worse in some cases. We turned it all around, and our carryover stocks on corn were actually at 2.167. That's slightly above the trade average guess, but not many people, I think, were anticipating that to be this number. And a lot of the numbers that come into these things are some of the ending stock numbers, and that pulled down the average. But in general, that's a 336 million bushel decline in corn and 170 million decline in soybeans. And boy, those are big adjustments here when you get into the heart of harvest in the U.S., having that much of a decline in the ending carryover stocks accordingly.
Yeah, how do you see I was checking the ending stocks compared to the previous year. How do you see that evolution?
Wow, the soybeans, that's pretty startling, isn't it, Luis? Boy, you picked up something there. You started out at the beginning stocks for last year were over 900. Then we came in with a number at 523, which was down from 550 here on just a couple weeks ago. And now here we are at 290 million bushels. Wow, that's a big turnaround. We can always help, or we can always point to our friends in Asia there. They have been a huge factor. They've helped South America down there, taken up a lot of beans, but they've also put a lot of beans on the U.S. export sales from there. And that's really the dynamics of this thing that we have seen our stocks to use ratio. Now, I know that's kind of a fancy sounding name, but at the same time, it helps us compare years where, from 10 years ago, 20 years ago, where we can say how tight is tight, how many bushels do we still have in our bin at the end of the year, and how's that compare to other years, and 6.4% is getting tight down there. In past years, there used to be talk about 150 million that we're running on little or no beans in the U.S. Well, when you have big exports, big crush, big demand, you need a little bit more beans in the pipeline, and we're getting close. I wouldn't say we're there yet, but we're getting close.
And it seems that China is buying from everybody this year, buying a lot from the U.S., from Brazil, and now a little bit from Argentina.
Right. Well, that's the thing. And I think you referenced it in our openings comments here about this export sales basis and that. I sent you a graphic on that, and I think it's quite startling from there. The total bushels here are just approaching, 1.5 billion bushels. So the USDA was projecting a 2.125 billion. That turns out to be over 70%. That is a startling number. And what happened is that particular relationship, this early in the season, we got 11 more months to go, and that kind of forced their hand. They had to bring up their export number 75 million. I think other people think it should be closer to 150. I wouldn't argue with that either. But the USDA tends to be conservative about making their changes when it comes to supply-demand numbers. But you add to this what we talked about, less production, and then turn around and have higher demand. They increased our U.S. exports by 75 million today. And I think, as I said, could be conservative. That takes us down to that number below 300 million, which is, as we say, it's tightening the belt. I wouldn't say it's we're strangling anybody, but we're tightening the belt right now. On the corn side, that's also had some impressive numbers. It went up over 40%, and that on its number, and that is just edges out, I think, as 2012 or 13 on percentage of sales this early in the year. But the interesting thing is this is hugely more demand, absolutely more bushels on the export commitments than we've had. And part of that's China, part of it's other people around the world. Interestingly enough, Brazil is just getting started on some of their exports on corn, which is going to be a competitive situation here. So I'm not sure how much of this corn that's on the start moving until maybe towards the first part of 2021, but it's on the books, and that's always good to have it lined up, if you will, for sales ahead. From there, they didn't change corn's numbers. Exports today left at 2.325. You can banner that around. You can say it's 100 million too low. I think the interesting twist is that today, in their corn demand numbers, they only sliced off 50 million off of exports, ethanol, and they took 50 million out of feed, and that's got people scratching their head after they just jumped up old crop feed demand quite dramatically. There's some talk that looking at some hog numbers in the U.S. that things are going to slow down there and go lower. And we won't have the exports on meat, so that might be right. But I think the ethanol number still has some potential weakness in it too. We are going back to work here in the U.S., but at the same time, I wonder if we're going to be able to be much higher than last year when we had 48.5 billion usage. We might get 50 or 100 million, but we're still at 5 billion number on the USDA, and that could be slipping back. A lot of people are working from home. Guess what we see over my back shoulder here? So that's part of the issue.
Yes, and we are seeing now the corn prices in Chicago above $4 for March deliveries. How much of La Nina is playing here?
That is a very good question. La Nina is a very interesting issue as we go through time here, particularly in where you're located at there in South America. La Nina's tendencies are not a very good positive trend for yield capabilities in Argentina, Rio Grande do Sul, Paraná. It's a little twisted logic as you get into Mato Grosso. We've had, I think, the impact of La Nina already in Brazil. It's delayed their soybean plantings there, which ultimately I think is the kicker in corn is the fact that pushes the corn plantings next spring later than they want, and that could put things into a problem next year. No, I think La Nina is a factor in this thing subtly. I think the other key feature is the fact it's been dry in Russia, and they're sounds like they're willing to be sellers of their wheat now, but they're not maybe going to be so excited about selling wheat next year, and less competition. Now today, part of the reason wheat was kind of kicked around was the fact that they didn't decrease Russia's wheat crop for the coming year, and overall the wheat stocks on a worldwide basis went up some. I hadn't had time to look at all those details. There's so many different things to look at, and I didn't get a chance to look into that today. But the wheat side of things has had some enthusiasm because of dry weather in Argentina and hurting the crop potential there, and also in Black Sea area. And if you think about it, even the Southern Plains here in the U.S., we're going along planning things, but I'm not sure how great of a scenario there's going to be on emergence of those plants. That's one of the comments that actually might have helped the wheat market earlier today. Was there was comments out of Russia that they might not plant 10 to 15% of their winter crop. Wow, that's a big chunk out of there. They can go around and put spring wheat in there, but that doesn't usually yield as good as winter wheat does.
Yes, and you also, among all of the data that you send me, you also send me data related to palm oil. How much is that influencing soybeans?
It's a big factor in here. The palm oil world is a very interesting world because we're dealing with permanent trees and how do we harvest them and how much do we get volume out of them and things like that. What started this whole kind of issue in the world of vegetable oils around the world is the fact that we had the El Nino that hit Australia and Southeast Asia and the whole Indonesia areas over there. And interestingly enough, when it happens, it doesn't change output. It's interesting, it kind of stunts the growth coming out of the next year or 18 months. That's what we're dealing with now because we're talking about rain in Australia. Now all of a sudden, today's commentaries was, oh, it's going to be too wet. We can't get out there and harvest the palm oil from the palm trees. So it's an interesting one. And today, I don't guarantee that I'm an expert on the world's veg oil markets. I'll tell you that because they are so huge and so complicated and so many different pieces. But I think we've all heard of an off the oil world, and its analyst had a big conference out there, and that's part of the reason I sent you that information today. Was the fact that he seems to be feeling like that there's a combination of good demand and some uncertainty of production out there, and that could be a fact. Usually when you have a big rally in beans, it's driven by soybean meal, and it's been a part of this thing and all that, but I'd have to say that, and that could still be a part of it where we go, and oil could back off a little bit, and that I've seen a few places, particularly in the Black Sea, that maybe their rapeseed / canola meal and oil will be higher this year. But the two biggies in the world, palm oil and bean oil, are the two biggies. And right now, the U.S. crop isn't as big as it used to be.
After all of these years, as an analyst, was there a year that was more interesting than 2020?
The year previous to this year, more interesting. Whoa. Well, I guess 2012 was quite an interesting year because of how significantly dry it was, and that it started in the fall in the U.S. and it continued over the winter and went into the spring. That would be an interesting scenario for 2021. I wouldn't say that any way possible that's what's happening out here in front of us, but many years I've looked through, that's one of those ones you keep your head on and remember how that all developed, because we've had $17 beans and $18 beans in the U.S. and how high they were in Brazil or Argentina. I don't know where you put those dollars at, but it's possible. I'd say probably not likely.
Very interesting. Thanks a lot, Jerry Gidel.
Good to be with you as always, Louis.